Welcome to Speaking of AI, where LXT's Phil Hall discusses current trends in AI with leading experts.
Today's guest on Speaking of AI is John Kelvie. John is founder and CEO of Bespoken. He has 20 plus years of industry experience and leadership as founder, CEO, and CTO of multiple organizations in the US and Europe. When you find yourself at a conference losing the will to live after days of death by PowerPoint, John is the person you hope you might be seated with at dinner. He's interesting, he's funny, and he's always ready to question the accepted wisdom on the topics of the day. John, it's a pleasure to welcome you to Speaking of AI.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here talking with you.
So you've been in this industry since, well, at least 2000. So you've seen a lot. Things have certainly changed very, very quickly in the last 5 to 10 years. My own view on this, I joined the industry in about 2001, and I wasn't sure this was ever going to work when I saw what the stage of the technology at that point. So tell me, I'd love to hear some of your observations on where the state of the art is today and your expectations of progress dating back to the early 2000s.
I mean, it's funny. So what pulled me into the space was I was doing initially a speech recognition app. And so we were doing, I had another startup, actually with the same partner, and a couple other folks who were terrific. And we were doing audio advertisements that you could talk back to, which I thought was a really brilliant idea. A little premature perhaps, but very good idea, and one that people are still working on. And that got me interested in the whole conversational AI, how speech recognition worked, being able to communicate hands-free, eyes-free, ambient computing, that whole kind of thing. And then when we saw Alexa come out, I just thought, gee, this is really going to bring so many people into this ecosystem. And I thought within a few months, we started Bespoken pretty soon thereafter, and I thought within a few months, people are going to be living in the world that I've been living in, and you've been living in too, Phil, which is, really dealing with a lot of data and a lot of testing, and a lot of diagnostics. The way I always like to explain to people was in my previous company, we were doing a lot of speech recognition work. I was the CTO. I was not a QA person, but I would write like 10 lines of C code, maybe a little bit more, and then test it in a variety of ways that got progressively more complex over somewhere between a day to a couple weeks. Because you might be introducing a noise filter, you might be doing something to optimize for an accent or trying to get a particular vocabulary or domain to work well. And it was all just these testing and diagnostics. And I thought, well, thanks to Amazon, everyone's going to live in this world, and I have some insight into it. And I would say, and it's not to say that we haven't got any traction in the last 5 years, we have, but I would still say people have not necessarily taken up that challenge quite as quickly as I thought they would. And so my impression overall has been that it's come along rather slowly, the progress. The technology has certainly moved forward. I think that the products have moved forward, and what businesses are offering to customers, I think, has moved forward a lot. But it's been incremental. And then it's interesting having this conversation today, because if we had it even at the end of last year, I would have had a different take, because then all of a sudden it just feels like it's, everything has changed, and it's because of OpenAI putting out, ChatGPT and GPT-3 and GPT-4, and it's just changed everyone's expectation for what's possible. I see peers that have been in the space for a while that are saying, and I don't think they're trying to gloat, but they're on LinkedIn saying, guys that were wondering why kind of kept at it with conversational AI. Like, see,
Yeah.
like there was something here. I wasn't just being delusional. Um, and so I, I don't know. I mean, I think it's an interesting question about what to expect next because I have no idea. I did not see OpenAI coming. I was not close to the ground on that, and it's just amazing. And what's even more amazing, um, is like we're talking to customers now, and now we just added on a question to every customer we talk to. What are you doing with LLMs? And a lot of them are doing so much more than I expected, and a lot of them are trying to push it into production. And I'm amazed, and I'm also amazed. And hopefully I'm not rambling here, but just like
No, this is great.
I also like one thing I've learned is like people are not like there's a lot of testing that's required. There's a lot of data that's required, and people are not necessarily in love with those two facts, right? And so it's like, how is this going to play out? I mean, if you don't love testing and data, I think it's going to be an interesting ride for a lot of folks.
Yes, indeed. In fact, we've published a report on AI maturity last year and a follow-up report this year. And I think that's one of the things that we picked up in that was that people are expecting. Well, one of the questions was, do you expect to need more training data, more data, less data? Is your spend on this going to increase? Is it going to stay the same? And nobody thought it was going to go down. But I don't think they're thrilled about spending money on it or investing in it. But out of, I think it was 200 people in the first year and 300 plus in the second year, nobody thought that their spend on data was going to go down. So it was an interesting stat. John, I've read some of your other interviews and some of your pieces on AI, and you've had a few things to say about misconceptions of AI. So I think you've said more than once that that there is a gap between people's perceptions of AI and the reality. And perhaps that the reality is a little bit more vanilla and needs to be a little bit more focused and to be focused and to be taken in smaller steps. Am I paraphrasing you accurately there?
You are, yeah.
I'd love
And
to
that
hear
has been my contention for a long time is that, I mean, I'll come to what I think has changed, but I mean, let's pretend we were talking in November of last year. I would still stick to what I've always said, which is that people need to be very careful about the use case that they're looking at. They need to understand the technology. They need to be ready to optimize for each of their use cases, even down to an intent level. And they need to not be thinking that this is just going to be like, HAL 9000 that you're going to be chit-chatting with and it's going to get everything right. It's a lot of work that goes into it. And quite frankly, my thesis for a long time, which I don't think I was alone in this, but I think the correct approach to the market was if you can use a website or an app, for whatever that use case is, if it exists and it's readily available, people are going to choose that because it's a more satisfying interaction, and I don't think that's a fact that's been widely disseminated in the first wave of chatbots and voice bots, and that's why I think there has been a lot of disappointment, and that's also why so much of it did retrench, as we did as a company, around the contact center because people are going to make phone calls no matter what, and so that's the one place where you can say, look, whether you like it or not, we're going to give you a bot. You'd probably rather talk to a person. If you knew where our app was that would solve this problem, you would have already used that. But because you can't find those things, you've called us up and now we can use AI to solve some part of your problems. And that's effective. That's obviously very effective. And if you approach it correctly, and I think I see it as a lot of work. I see it as, probably more complicated than it should be, but nonetheless rather complex. You can be very successful. And the ROI that we see with, automation, conversational automation is tremendous. But then when you have something like ChatGPT that comes along, I mean, that's where now I'm not going to get up and moonwalk, but do I need to revise my assessment? Because people in Google and the OpenAI folks, I mean, they obviously knew this was coming. I did not foresee it. And I do think, I don't want to be a naysayer because I think it's tremendous, but, there's some question marks there. But nonetheless, I mean, with that new state of the art, how many new use cases does it open up? And does it create the potential for people to go beyond command and control, very tightly controlled domains? I think we'll see. And I guess the other thing I expect is it's ChatGPT now. But I mean, how long before there's a voice GPT? And what's going to be the impact for that? I think it could be equally sort of seismic, if not more so.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be the interpersonal level of that is going to be quite interesting. So I think voice personal assistants are going very well these days, but I think there's the expectations on quality of synthesis and the quality of the interpersonal skills of the technology are going to really be an important area for development.
I guess I'll just be interested to see how quickly people can get the new technology into production. I mean, that was another thing that was just startling me, is how customers are really thinking about some novel use cases there. I think that, they can delight their consumers. Are they going to be able to do it in a safe way? I imagine that's something that maybe you all are looking at, Phil. I mean, because I think the sort of safety of these bots is an interesting question for anyone who's planning on deploying them.
Yeah, in fact, that was going to be my next question for you. And I feel like I've caught you at a really interesting time. I'm quite glad having the conversation now, not October last year or not a few months from now. And I've caught you at a point where there's a certain amount of cognitive dissonance going on for you because of what you've been exposed to and rethinking of your position. But and you've talked a bit already about, I think, being very impressed by what's been achieved, quite rightly so. I think everybody is. But talk about what you think are the risks, maybe some of the, where do you see the risks with the current stage of technology, and what do you see as the necessary mitigations?
The risk, I think, is kind of obvious and rather profound, and I'll be very interested to see how people deal with it, which is that we're working on a benchmark for this. We did a benchmark previously of Alexa and Google and Siri, and so we want to revise that. Probably do the same sort of benchmark again, but include ChatGPT, maybe some other of the interesting pieces that are out there. And in the way we evaluated their intelligence, and there's a lot of ways, like many ways to do it. But we found an excellent paper written on how to evaluate the sophistication of these NLPs on open domain questions, which just means basically general knowledge. And then they had a very compelling way of breaking down what constituted complexity. So it was like things like temporal questions. Did this happen before that? That was an indication of a more sophisticated assistant. Things like composite questions. Almost everybody would get it right if you said, what day was Abraham Lincoln born on? But a composite question would be, what day was Abraham Lincoln's son born on? then you've got to figure out, okay, well, who's his son, and then what date was he born? Did he have more than one son? You're getting into more complex stuff. And then obviously the classic, how well does it do not giving you an answer when it's completely made up? And so if it's something like, what day was Abraham, I'm going to reveal my lack of knowledge of history, but let's say Lincoln didn't have a daughter. What day was his daughter born on? They really like to give you an answer about a fictional daughter. They all sort of find that irresistible. That was easily the worst category for them. They're on open domain stuff. They're in the 50s, 60s at the best. Google easily does the best, but Siri and Alexa are respectable. But 60% is you're doing great, just great, and that was a great achievement for those guys. If ChatGPT or GPT-4 interface is able to get to 95%, and I that's conceivable. I mean, we haven't assessed it, but if it got to that level of accuracy, it's like, what an achievement. It's obviously, I don't know if it's revolutionary, but it's profound. Mm-hmm. Nonetheless, that's still 5% of the time that it's wrong. Yeah. And, that's a problem. I mean, we had a customer talking about a medical use case, not like, in the medical domain, without getting too specific. And it's just like, how could you be, and we know people are wrong. I mean, if I call up my insurance company, they're wrong a certain percentage of the time. But still, can you possibly tolerate a system that is wrong 5% of the time? And how do you mitigate that? And I don't know how people are going to do that, honestly. I really don't. I mean, we've started kind of, breaking our heads over how to do it and what we can offer to customers to assist them with that. Big surprise, we think it's testing and data. But I don't know what else it would be. And I guess, the other part that we sort of hypothesize is you need the testing, you need the data, and you may need an AI as good or better than the one that you're testing to evaluate it. Because when you're looking at, people are like, well, here's the great news, or at least here's what we're hearing from some customers. Like, we can throw enormous data sets at it and it'll chew through them and really potentially make a lot of sense of them, which is, that's fantastic. But, how then do you go about verifying that size of data? It's impossible to do it manually, and it's not obvious. You can't do it exhaustively in an automated way either. So you have to do some sort of, sampling, and you have to come up with some fairly rigorous testing process. So I think it's a huge challenge for folks that are out there.
Yeah, absolutely. You've triggered a thought with me here. I'm wondering if I was put through the same tests that you're putting these products through, whether my accuracy could reach 95%. I have my doubts. My family would probably tell you that I'd get nowhere near 95%. And I wonder whether people can work with 95% if you know that it's 95%, or sorry, I'm rambling a bit here, but I think the question is, if I achieve 95%, that's probably okay because people know I'm fallible, and they're quite comfortable with going, yeah, well, it's good to hear what you think, Phil, but you're wrong. People are quite comfortable with that. But maybe with something like a ChatGPT, people have a higher expectation that this is the voice of authority, and so the risk is that it's a twofold risk. One part is that you don't know which part is the 5%, and the other is that it's expressed so eloquently and so convincingly that you buy into it anyway.
I think it's that first part is well stated, though. I think it's that you don't know which 5% is not right. But and again, I'm talking about cases that I would characterize as sort of mission critical. I mean, there's many use cases, obviously, where business does want it to be, I mean, everyone's going to say they want it to be perfect. It may not be perfect, but, they may not have that tolerance. I mean, there's lots and lots of use cases, where, like, I do think of so much of the initial wave of chatbots was around FAQs. I mean, for an FAQ, I certainly don't expect perfection. I mean, especially like take us as a software company, right? I mean, I guess we should probably roll this out. Not that our stuff is that complicated, but if you had a question about how our software works, if we deployed a large language model and it answered your question right 95% of the time, it would be fantastic. I mean, if it covered things that we hadn't come up with, our customers aren't going to be angry over that. I mean, they know how to get in touch with us if we say that it's, you're supposed to use a colon and it's a semicolon. I mean, life is going to go on. It's not a mission critical. It's not healthcare. It's not financial services. So I do think that, I am focusing on some of these, not edge cases, but the more challenging ones, because I think there's so many use cases where it's just, it's changed and it's better.
And in terms of where you think things are headed, I think that those financial and medical use cases are quite prominent in people's thinking. Financial requires very quick decision making, which is clearly a part of the skill set of technology. And do you think that that these are viable use cases into the future, or do you think that the risks are just too great?
That's where I just don't know. I mean, I think there are risks and I think there's challenges, but I think there's also, I mean, and I don't want to hold myself, I shouldn't hold myself out as an expert on large language models. The core of our business is around classic speech recognition and NLU technology. And so that's what I really understand best. But I read, a lot of the different articles and announcements, and I play around with it. And, like I saw something that said the ChatGPT had passed a medical exam, and like now the score was 60%. And I thought, gee, doctors, I mean, I guess that's a passing grade, but that's a D, at least here in the U.S. I mean, I don't want the doctor that got a D on the medical exam. But that said, I mean, certainly somebody, I would, I mean, I think there'll be so many regulations to go through, but, and I mean, to what you were just saying, Phil, like just me personally, not, like as a business person, I would want it to be perfect, or, I know our customers want everything to be perfect. But for me, as like a patient, if it was 60 or 70% correct, I would be really impressed, because I've been to doctors. I'm in my 40s and approaching older ages, and like, I've seen a lot of doctors. I mean, they're wonderful. They're very intelligent people, but they're wrong a lot of the time. I mean, Google's such a great thing for patients. I mean, you're just always looking to see what they said and kind of, you ask some questions, and, they're very fallible. And so just something that can get you information that has that sort of breadth of knowledge. I mean, it's just, it obviously can bring a lot of benefit there.
Yeah, a very good friend of mine who had a first career as a doctor, as a general practitioner. She said to me that she goes into a doctor's surgery and sees their degree on the wall. And she says, I want to see their academic record on the wall, not their degree. I want to know whether they scraped in or blitzed it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, they should be forced to publish that.
Yeah. So I'm just going to shift gears a little bit here. In terms of data, Are you working with synthetic data? We hear people talking a lot about synthetic data at the moment. Where do you see things going in that area?
We do a lot of work with synthetic data, but I mean, and again, this is where I would say the industry has not matured in the way that I thought it would, because we deal, initially I thought, well, and like, so I probably shared this with you, Phil, but it's probably worth mentioning. Like when I started off, I was using, doing my own testing and building my own system. I was using a fair amount of synthetic data. I was using my own voice a fair bit, and then I, had a need for more data. Started using Mechanical Turk, which was pretty low quality data. I definitely, anybody listening to this, definitely talk to LXT. Don't try to use Mechanical Turk.
Thank you, John.
But then, and so then we got some crowdsourced data, and then we got production data, and we had a whole big mix of those, and sorted into different data sets and used them in different ways. And I really expected that was the journey that everyone would be on. But even with, we've got a good client base now. I'm not going to claim that we have the most sophisticated customers, but, we've got big names. They're working on high profile projects. And, it's hard to even get them to see necessarily, or convince them of the benefit of doing the synthetic data testing. I mean, there is this, I think people sort of think, well, like, for example, I sat down with somebody who used to work at Apple, and they said, well, you guys are always advocating for testing with all this different data. And they're like, did you know Apple, all we did was golden utterances? And I'm sure that's not what their data scientists dealt with. But on the QA side, it was just like we wanted only the most pristine audio. And I thought, well, that's that's surprising to me. I mean, you really need more than that to evaluate the fitness of these engines. But customers that we see, they don't, they I don't know. I mean, they find that intimidating is what I find.
Yeah, I think us too. Certainly when we're dealing with large technology organizations who are building core technology, there's no question they get it. They understand the value of this. But when you're dealing with second-tier customers who are users of the core technology rather than developers of the core technology, then that conversation becomes a little more difficult and takes a little longer for them to fully understand the value of the testing, etc.
Yeah, I mean, and the interesting thing is, I mean, they will frequently, when we're starting off working with people, I mean, they buy into that whole roadmap. Let's start with some synthetic data. Let's then do crowdsource. Then maybe we can work in the production data. And production data is tricky because, there is obviously a lot of sensitivity around that. And you do need a way to, sort of safely annotate it, which that can be challenging. But, they sort of, I don't know, they tend to get tired, I think, or something. So they let it go. But that is, we are dealing with the people that are, I mean, our customers are, banks and entertainment companies. I don't want to name specific ones in the context of something that's a little bit negative, but, that they are not, it's not like, Amazon. I mean, we know Amazon is knee deep in data. Same thing with Google and the like.
Yes, and it's often been said that whoever has the most data wins. So, okay, so we're running out on time here, but I just have one last question I'd like to ask you today, which is, if you were running the interview, what is the one question that you would want to ask yourself, and what's the answer?
I like that question. So I guess I mean, we sort of talked about it, but I do think, and so you did sort of ask this, Phil, but I mean, I would just, put a pin on it, which is, what is going to be the impact of LLMs on our space? I think that that's the most interesting question that we're all confronted with now. I don't come here today pretending to have the answer to that. I will be a very wealthy person soon if I do find the answer to that. But I think, from our point of view, we think that LLMs are going to get deployed quickly. We see immense benefit to them. I don't want to say they're overhyped or underhyped, but this is a real leap forward in terms of the state of the art of technology. And I think because of that, there's immense interest in it. People are going to start deploying it, finding use cases for it. It's going to unlock use cases they couldn't do before. And I think, for customers that are out there that are thinking about it, the thing I would sort of say to them is, do it, but then you do want to work with partners such as Bespoken and LXT so that you are able to do it safely, so that you are evaluating the answers and the quality of the responses that these engines are giving to make sure that your customers, that they're getting the best possible representation of your organization and your knowledge. I think that's the promise that they hold. And I don't think people should be frightened about it. This is where it goes back to an ROI question. It's like, if we go back to the example of me as a patient, if it's 70% correct on diagnoses, giving me information that is very useful 70% of the time, I think that's still really helpful. What if you can get it to 75 though? What if you can get it to 78? What if you can get it to 80? It's worth your time to look at that and to do that optimization. That's what we've seen from the outset, and the sort of message that's, or the mission that's informed us. And I think it's, my hypothesis on how these LLMs fit in is that it's going to continue to hold even more so because, it just, and again, hopefully not to go on too long, but it's just that, overall, the whole trend that I believe was the case with AI is it's less development, that's going down, and your testing and your quality assurance and your data goes up in terms of its importance. And this is just, that equation is continuing to become, more and more of a differentiation, or more and more differentiated. So that's what we see happening. But at the same time, I will gladly revisit this with you in a year or 2 years, and we can see how it plays out, because it's going to be, whatever happens, it's going to be fun, I think.
Yeah, I like your assessment of that. I like the idea of reconvening in a year or so and comparing notes on how that's actually gone, how things have actually played out. So thank you. That was a well-selected question. I'm glad you asked it. And thanks again for spending time with us today. It's been really stimulating and interesting conversation, as I expected it would be. Thanks very much, and I look forward to speaking to you again before too long.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. It's great talking with you.
Thanks.